Hello everyone, this is Mirko Guerrini and I welcome you to the Jazz Transcription Clinic, a monthly interviews podcast where we talk with accomplished jazz doctors about their lives, career and their personal secrets on the art of transcribing. If you want to improve at jazz, stay tuned and follow the Jazz Transcription Clinic on the socials for more content. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is being recorded. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and the Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today. Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Jazz Transcription Clinic Podcast. Today our guest doctor in the clinic is the British pianist, composer and transcriptioner Rowan Hudson. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And thanks for being here. It means really a lot because I just shoot an email to Rowan out of the blue. I found his YouTube channel called RH Transcription. He has also a personal YouTube channel with his music. And given the large amount of transcription, which will be, of course, a topic of our conversation, I decided to try to contact him. And he responded very quickly and was enthusiastic of participating in the podcast. So I'm very honored and privileged. So as I said, Rowan is a pianist and a composer, has just released a new CD as a piano solo CD, and all his music and transcriptions are also available on his website. And as usual, all the links will be in the video description and podcast description. So please check him out because it's really worthy, and we will hear of him a lot, I'm pretty sure. And so let's start. As I said, welcome and thanks for being here. As you know, the podcast is about transcribing and to just have a little chat, and I will ask you a few questions on to pick your brain on the transcription which you demonstrate to be very good at.
Thank you. There's not many things I'd rather sit down and talk about for an hour, so it's my pleasure to talk about these kind of things as well.
Oh, I'm glad I found the right topic then. Thank you. So just a little reminder to our listeners to subscribe to the podcast, to subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you want to comment, I'm always happy to receive comments because they motivate me to keep going. And if you have suggestions, criticism on how to improve the podcast, please feel welcome to shoot any idea to me. So we start with the first question. Ron, what do you think?
Let's go.
Great. So why do you transcribe?
That's a complicated one.
Yeah.
For lots of reasons, but primarily because I like it. I like the act of transcribing. It's I don't completely see it as a means to an end. Once you've got the transcription there's a lot you can do with it. It's very useful to transcribe for ear training, all these kind of things. But also I just like it. I just like sitting there and working out the puzzle, finding out when there's a bar that you get stuck on and you just can't quite get it. And then finally you find the answer, you start to get things right. It's I just like the act of doing it as much as anything.
So you like go to the park and sit next to a lady that is reading a book and you do a transcription because you like it.
Yeah. yeah.
I love it. I think you are the first one who who gave me that answer. Like I do it because I love it. I, so you like the act of transcribing?
Yeah, I think there's something. It depends. It depends what I'm transcribing. If I'm transcribing something I really, really like, and a recording that I've listened to 1,000 times and I really love, there's almost something sort of almost archaeological. It's like this. Say Bill Evans played this thing in 1962, and he went home that night and he went off and lived the rest of his life, and this record is there, and it's like going back and finding the real details of what he played that one night, and exactly how his fingers moved and exactly how his ideas were flowing. There's something sort of in digging up the past, digging up that one moment in the past that I find, if it's a recording I love, if it's not a recording I love,
Yeah.
I couldn't care less. But there's something sort of archaeological almost about that.
That's interesting because it reminds me of a lot of daydreaming I had when I started listening to jazz and I fell in love with this music style. And I was, getting a CD. Before that, I was getting vinyls because I'm 375 years old. So,
Well, you're up to date on vinyl now.
yeah.
That's what everyone's doing.
And I was daydreaming, looking at the date. So, on 27th of November in 1959, and I was imagining these five people, leaving their homes, and it's very cold, in New York, and reaching the studio, and everyone is complaining because the weather is miserable. And then one, the day before got a parking fine. And then you listen to the music and you think, gosh, they were normal people that all of a sudden were able to do some magic. And I always try to imagine the normality of the day, to catch a little bit of also that vibe. And also remind me what you said, about a historian that I like. I always listen to his podcast. He's an Italian historian, specialized in Middle Age. And once someone asked him, if you could travel in time, who would you like to meet? And he said, you will be surprised because I could pick, Charles the Great or Dante Alighieri, in Florence. But I would like to speak to a farmer in the 13th century.
Just a normal person.
And spend a day with them. I would love to see, because we know bits and pieces of those people, but we don't know anything about normal people. And he said, I've been agonizing all my life to just try to understand where they were going shopping, what they were eating for breakfast. I would love to have breakfast with them, with the family and the kids. And so it's a bit similar, you want to get in contact with not only the music, but also the person, and dig and imagining, the person doing it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. On that specific day, at that specific time, on that specific take
Exactly.
of that tune, exactly what happened right in those 5 minutes,
And since you've done a lot of that, what do you expect to bring home when you transcribe? So, of course, you said, I love it. I love the act of transcribing, but you also do it thinking of what you will benefit from it.
Yeah, which can be a lot of things. I mean, I think first of all, what I don't really do, and I think what a lot of people do is take out lines, and deconstruct them and take them through 12 keys and, all of that kind of standard practice that is probably a very good idea. And I wouldn't tell someone not to do that at all. For me, it's much more about the ideas on the page and sort of seeing, okay, this is what they were thinking, in a conceptual sense. This is how their phrasing works out. That they're accenting phrases that start towards the end of a line or cross over from an A section into a B section and things like that.
Yeah.
And I notice, I think a lot of that stuff does get in your playing. If you transcribe something and play through it a few times, you don't have to get to every single note, and deconstruct everything. Particularly with some pianistic things, I think.
I was going to provoke you and say, but are you really sure that you are not influenced by what you transcribe? Because I think, when you spend few hours on, 20 seconds of music, I think your brain is picking a lot more than what we think. And eventually,
sure. Yeah.
Maybe not in the immediate future, but eventually within, 6 months time, you will reprocess that information and it will come out, maybe triggered by, this is what I think, and this is what I can hear when I listen to myself playing. Sometimes I can tell you exactly what is the origin of that line that I played, and it's very different. Right. Maybe it's very different from the original, but it's my mind going through a process of like a food processor, right? You put an ingredient and then it's there. You put in the freezer, and then when you need it, you take it out and use it. But you said it yourself that it's coming into your playing anyway.
Yeah, I think you can see that in very obvious ways and probably very subtle ways. Like I was saying, block chords is a very, very sort of definable thing. The way that Red Garland plays block chords is slightly different to the way that McCoy Tyner does a similar sound, makes a similar sound compared to Ahmad Jamal or Bill Evans or anyone else. And you can kind of quantify that. You can actually describe exactly how they're different in intervals and things. So those sorts of things, I think, can just to see, okay, that's another sound, that works doing it that way. And you don't need to necessarily practice that all that much. It's just, for example, Red Garland plays with an octave and a fifth in the middle. McCoy Tyner tends to play with an octave and a sixth in the middle. It's just useful stuff to know, But then I think in much more subtle ways, just certain ways of phrasing things or accenting certain places in a scale and things, that I'm sure gets into your playing without it being practiced incessantly.
Yeah, absolutely. And to me, it's also, trying to discover a little bit more, to just uncover the surface of the magic that is in music. So I'm not a pianist. I just play amateurly. I have studied many years when I was a kid, and then I switched to saxophone. But one thing that always struck me is that you can hear Keith Jarrett, Herbie Hancock, Brad Meldau, you name it, playing on the same piano, playing the same tune, and it will be a totally different sound. But even more, you can listen to classical pianists playing on the same piano the same piece of music, which means exactly the same notes,
Yeah.
and you get a totally different experience.
Yeah.
So sometimes the transcription to me is like, digging just 1 meter of the 2000 kilometers of magic, but just 1 meter, and try to understand why it sounds different. So whether it's a technical thing like fingering on the piano or on the saxophone, I don't know, a particular position of the tongue, in the mouth. And not that I want to exactly know and come up with like a recipe. That would be silly to do,
And probably impossible.
and absolutely impossible. It would lead you to a big fail, epic.
Yeah.
But I like trying to discover, because I think it's a way for me to work towards freedom and add a few colors into my palette, so that then I can change maybe the color, because I know that I can get to that color if I do things, which is a different way to study, the instrument, and to study the technique. So you learn by something that has been processed by others, and you filter through your personality. And sometimes you are also wrong. Sometimes I think that the player was doing something and I try and it doesn't work, but then I do something else that probably that player wasn't doing, and I get closer. So it's just a research thing.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? You'll never leave yourself behind. Even you playing Hank Mobley, there's still a bit of you in there, and there always will be a bit of you in there.
Of course.
You actually can't get there, and that's a good thing.
Of course.
Everything goes through this filter.
Yeah.
And unless your goal is, I want to just recreate this as perfectly as possible,
Yeah.
which I guess could be, but is kind of, a very non-musical way of looking at things. Everything kind of, no matter how hard you try, everything will come out sounding like yourself eventually, I think.
Yeah, unless you deliberately want to copy someone. But usually it doesn't end well, even that. Because every time you think, now I'm going to play like that, you lose the point of this beautiful genre, isn't it? Which is
Exactly.
is also interacting with the environment around you, whether it's musicians or if you play alone, it's just the room, and the momentum of your soul, in the act of playing. So,
and I think the interesting thing about that as well is that can be very different depending on who you're transcribing. I would say, someone like Fred Hirsch is very sort of transcribable. Like everything's quite neat.
Yeah.
And it's he's got different voices and things, and you can kind of write those out. And when you play it, it sounds a little bit like Fred Hirsch. You're sort of close. Whereas someone like Duke Ellington, it could be the most perfect transcription, but if you play it, it doesn't sound like Duke Ellington.
Yeah.
There's some other stuff going on there, just in the way he articulates notes and his way of playing dynamics and things. It's incredibly difficult to get anywhere close. Even playing the right notes, right rhythms, everything sort of technically correct. Which I find really interesting.
Yeah.
That some of those are a lot more recreatable than others.
Yeah.
And generally, those are the ones that I like to transcribe because you can get somewhere close.
There's less frustration.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So, just to keep going, I would be interested to know, how do you choose the solos that you are going to transcribe? Is there a particular reason, or is just something that catches your attention and boom, you start a transcription?
Well, I think I have to like it first of all. No matter no matter how popular it may be, or even technically interesting it may be. If I don't like it, I just don't want to do it. I only really want to transcribe music that I like. As I was saying, some things are a lot more transcribable than others. So there's a few piano players, someone like Andrew Hill, for example. I like his music. I don't think I've ever transcribed any of it, actually, because it's just so, everything's so sort of vague rhythmically, and it just wouldn't come across well on the page.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's things that I'm interested in for various reasons. It may even be things that I'm interested in that I wouldn't necessarily listen to all that much, but I'm just curious to see what was going on there. How is this person thinking?
Yeah, I've noticed you transcribe the majority of pianists, of course, but have you done other instruments, or is it something that doesn't interest you a lot?
Oh, it's something that interests me a lot. Yeah, it's the only reason that I, at least on the YouTube channel and outwardly, I only transcribe piano players. It's just there's just too much idiomatic stuff attached to other instruments. Like I've transcribed a lot of Miles, but I would never claim that they're perfect. All of the stuff that comes with playing a trumpet, and that's the thing with piano, is you sort of play a note or you don't play it, and there's not a lot in between. Whereas, false fingerings and hammer-ons and things on guitars and all that stuff, I'm just not. I know I'm not going to be perfect, and someone else really should do that. Someone who plays that instrument would do a much better job than me, at least of getting the real details. I've transcribed a lot of other stuff, a lot of other instruments, just out of interest, just to try and see what's going on. But yeah, I try and steer clear of dumbing those down too much.
Yeah, of course. I always quote an interview I read to Pat Metheny where he said, I think the question was about his lyricism and how lyrical he can be on the guitar, and he said he transcribed a lot of trumpeters, and I get it. I think I dig it, because trumpeters are very, very lyrical by the nature of the instrument that forces you to imagine the notes in your head. Otherwise, you can take a false note or something that is not exactly what you wanted. While, for example, on the piano, but even on the saxophone, we have one key for each note. And there is always the risk that the young player, shuts down the ears and start playing with just the muscle memory, of it. While a trumpeter cannot really do it. He has to sing the lines.
Yeah, that's true.
And
that's true. Yeah, and I think also they often tend to be more interesting rhythmically.
Yeah.
Because it's not an instrument that really lends itself to just playing 16th notes at lightning speed. It kind of forces you into it being more interesting, almost.
Unless you are Clifford Brown or Wynton Marsalis, but
there's exceptions, obviously.
But yeah, the concept of Pat Metheny was also that he said, for example, he started transcribing a lot of Chet Baker and started playing on one single string, the whole solo. So again, forcing yourself to play your instrument as a different one may open up different scenarios, different worlds that you wouldn't explore otherwise.
Yeah, I think those sorts of limitations can be massively useful. I think that's in sort of jazz education even, and people starting out playing jazz. That's often a problem, is that you can do anything, and even any instrument really is capable of doing so many things. But actually, you're much better off limiting yourself quite substantially, and really trying to find something interesting within those parameters. Yeah. There was a bass player that I used to play with, who used to be a drummer, quite a good drummer actually. He was really, he'd been playing for years, and he became a bass player for some reason. And all the solos he took, he was just playing just triads really, root and fifth and the odd third and maybe the odd seventh or something. But it was really good stuff. It was like really interesting rhythmically, and there was a logic to it. And in a way, it's like I was glad that he couldn't just run over the whole instrument, and do all this clever stuff, because the limitations made him a much more interesting and much more recognizable player. There weren't a lot of other bass players that I was playing with at the time who were doing that, because they could do everything else. Yeah. So it's that thing of having so much ability that you don't even need to show it. I guess that's the ultimate, is you get to the point where you really can do all that stuff, but you don't need to, and that muscle memory doesn't kick in, and you just fly off, and you've given everything away in the first 8 bars.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a big point. Maybe we will discuss further this, but you don't want to become a copy of anyone. But at the same time, there is all those resources available for us, and sometimes we feel lost. And so we try to apply a very rational methodology to it, like, decompose, take one line, you learn in 12 keys, different speed, and then you add a bit in front, a bit at the end, and you change the last note, and blah, blah, blah. I'm with you. I've done a bit of that, but I don't believe it's the best way to profit from a transcription. Mostly when I understood that the notes are only a small part of the whole thing. Playing.
Yeah, that really should be taught to everyone very, very quickly, I think. There's a huge bias for notes all over the place.
I tend to teach to my students that the transcription, once is completed, once you have learned all the notes, whether you have memorized it or you have written down all the notes, that's when your job starts. So transcribing, to me, is a preparation to a different task. And I need to know the material I'm dealing with, and then I start to work with it. So, for example, if I transcribe a saxophone player, for me would be, where does the guy take breath?
Yeah,
it's important to know. As well, probably for you would be, where is the thumb, passing? It's on the 3rd note of the scale, it's on the 4th note. What would be not necessarily the best fingering, but what would be the fingering that was used there?
Yeah.
Right, and so you need to already have transcribed it all. So a lot of people, do transcription, and once they got all the notes, finished. To me, actually, the journey starts there. That's just preparing the luggage, for the journey, to get the notes. And then I start, listening to vibrato, to the attack of the notes, dynamics, accents, articulation, and all sort of things that have nothing to do with the notes.
Do you learn the solo as well? Do you learn it off by heart?
Some of them, yes. If I prepare an episode for the podcast, sometimes I don't have time to do it. But
Yeah.
there are, quite a few solos that I can still play, most of it. And this actually leads us to the next question, which is, can you just talk to us about your methodology, and then maybe I will tell you a little bit of my methodology, but we are very interested in knowing what is your process, from start to finish.
So from starting, say I've got a recording I want to transcribe, where do I go from there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I actually like to listen to it a few times. I don't sort of half listen to it once and go, yeah, that sounds good. I'll start working on that. I like to listen to it, and really, really sit and do nothing else and listen to it and try and get some sense of an overview of where this is going, rather than sort of discovering everything bar by bar. And then I begin, and I try to sort of know what the geography is, so know what section I'm working on, and I always try and leave it, if I stop transcribing and go and do something else, try and leave it on a section that is nice to come back to. I don't try not to leave it on a huge cadenza that's going to take me 2 hours. So I do everything on a laptop. I don't sit by the piano. I use transcribe, the software, and notate things and basically try and do everything by ear as much as possible. That I'm aware is slightly different to how other people do things. First of all, I think a lot of people like to be at the piano or at the instrument and working through things like that. Part of that actually is, first of all, I'm sat there for hours. I want to be comfortable, but also I like that moment where you've got a section done. You've spent 2 or 3 hours, and then you come over to the piano and see how it sounds. See how close you were. And also within sort of in a more technical sense, and again, I think this is slightly different to how a lot of people do things. I never really do things with intervals. I just don't hear intervals in the way that other people do as a tool for working things out. So, I'm sure you've heard that thing of like you assign a song that to every interval. So a perfect fourth is softly, and those kind of things. That just doesn't work for me. I just don't hear things like that. It's the context matters too much. A perfect fourth between the root and the fourth sounds very different to a perfect fourth between the seventh and the flat nine in an altered scale, for example. I just don't hear things that way. So I hear everything in relation to the root. So if there's a line, I'm hearing every note as the third of the scale going up to the fifth of the scale, and how all of those relate to the root note. So I'd hear a fifth wanting to go up a few steps to the root.
It's a more contextual, harmonical pitch that you use.
I guess so. I don't have anything like perfect pitch, so I'm not doing things that way.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah. I mean, I really don't mind. I'm happy to not have perfect pitch. It's it can be a bit of a blessing and a curse, I think.
Yeah. I have a lateral question for you, but it's related to what you just said, because, for example, I don't have perfect pitch, but through the years, I think I developed what I call a perfect pitch for saxophone. So if I hear saxophone playing, I can tell you exactly all the notes, but because of the memory that I have of the saxophone playing that sound. Is there anything similar on the piano?
I don't think there really is. Not to the same extent. I know, like, guitarists get very good at hearing a low E because they hear it every time they tune up, and and they hear that the sound of an open string is slightly different to the sound of any other note, isn't it? I don't think there really is an equivalent on the piano because it's so equal. I have noticed over many years that I really don't have perfect pitch, but I think I'm a little bit closer than I was. I'm like 5% closer. If someone plays a note, and I know, particularly if it's in the low range of the piano, where I guess the sort of timbre of the instrument changes more quickly, I might not know what note it is, but I know what note it isn't. There's a couple I know that's not a D or an E, but it's somewhere around A flat or that sort of area.
Yeah.
But no, I don't think there's really an equivalent in terms of the instrument giving you any clues in that way.
So when you start a transcription, you said you don't use the piano. Do you use any reference to start?
Well, I have in transcribe software. There's like a little piano keyboard that just plays a tone. So I've got a reference of like, okay, I know what key we're in.
Yeah.
For a start, and
because
I really try not to, but I can check things there if I really need to.
I never used transcribe, but I forgot that there is a keyboard there. Yes. So, like, give me a point and I will lift the world. The famous quote. So give me a reference and I can transcribe everything. Is that what you do, basically?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't always go perfectly to plan, but that's the idea. If someone tells me this note is a C, you play a C and go, that's a C, then I've got a reference, and then in theory I can work out everything from there.
And this is nice because the other night I had a gig which is a particular gig. I'm doing a cycle of concerts and conversation around specific composers or music styles from Italy for the Italian community here at the Italian Museum here in Melbourne. And the other night I did this conversation concertation, I should call it, on Morricone, Ennio Morricone, the Italian film composer. And I had an audience of non-musicians, of course, and sometimes it's hard because you have to be careful not to go too technical, too theoretical, because they will start to, get lost immediately. Yeah. But I showed them how Morricone was able to change the weight of the notes, which is similar to what you said, that a fourth interval changes depending on the context. And so there is this piece by Morricone where the exact same melody is harmonized in two different ways, and every note, if it was a third, becomes a seventh. And
right.
And it's funny because the melody is very simple and the harmony is very simple too. But I think the people in the end got it, because when you contextualize it in that sense, the G played in a E flat major 7 chord has a particular sound, and then you play G but over A flat major 7 chord, and it's a completely different world. Even if it's the same note, and you try to keep the chords quite close to where you played. So that's also interesting that our ears can work out spaces and notes and intervals in a different way, and can get the context and can get a different shade in the color of the note that tells you, oh no, that's that note. I like it.
Yeah.
And yeah, in short, my methodology, if I have the time to do it, I listen multiple times, several times for a few days, just the track, possibly just the solo if I want to transcribe just the solo. I used to copy on a tape, copy the solo like 10 times in a row. Now I do.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Remember, I come from the Jurassic. I still had the tapes, and I had a double deck, tape recorder. So I was putting one tape and an empty one, and just copy the solo 10 times. And then in the car, I had a cassette player. So I was listening to just the solo. Now I do it sometimes with Logic, and then I put the track on my phone, and it's just solo 10 times, and I start to sing back. So again, if I have the time, I first learn to sing it, and I'm a horrible singer, but I don't care.
Yeah, that's irrelevant.
Yeah, that's
It's
totally
doing it
irrelevant.
that's
But
important.
I'm internalize the sound
Yeah.
of it. And that helps me even before I start thinking what the notes would be. It does help me first, for example, if it's a woodwind player or a brass player, first to align my breathing with it. So with piano and guitar, it gets difficult sometimes. If you play a line across like 8 bars at 90 BPM, I would die. So
Yeah.
I have to fill in, breath somewhere. But it helps me also in the rhythm, in getting the rhythm, because I know exactly that phrase will take 1.5 bar, even if I don't think too much yet at this stage, whether it's a fifth doublet or a crochet triplet across the bar. I know that period, which is 1 unit in my brain, occupies that amount of space, and that helps me a lot to understand more or less. It's like having a draft of the rhythm texture of the solo, and then I start.
So you're sort of working phrase by phrase and knowing the whole phrase and then working out the whole phrase rather than just sort of bar by bar going through.
Yeah, but again, time permitting, I learned the whole solo, so I know phrase by phrase because I have learned the whole thing, and so I know exactly what is the next phrase and where it starts and where it finishes, and then I start considering, oh yeah, this is bar 4 and it ends in the middle of bar 6, and I start like putting some bubbles, of, and then I start writing it, or maybe before I start playing it, and that process is usually very quick if I know how to sing it back. If I know it by heart and I can sing it even without the track playing, that is the best situation where I could find myself. If I can sing it from scratch, like out of the blue, I can start singing. Just playing on the instrument takes me a short time because I already know it. And
I think if you have that approach, I think that would really get inside your own playing then, wouldn't it? Because you're really internalizing everything about the solo. You can play it, you can sing it, you can run through it in your head, you know the whole thing. So if that's your methodology, you could go through and sort of take things through 12 keys and superimpose phrases on other changes and things like that. But actually there's a lot getting in your playing, I would think.
Yeah.
Just by knowing it that well, knowing it inside out.
It would take me a little bit more to transpose, for example, because remember what I learn is that exact sound.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
learn, I don't know, the Mixolydian scale on the tenor sax, and I know exactly that that is the sound of that. Now, and then you ask me to transpose that phrase into B major, and I could be wrong. It's I'm not that immediate in transposing everything because it's something that I haven't done like crazy. Like I remember once Michael Brecker, I went to a workshop in Italy, and he was a monster. I'd never seen anyone as quick as him. He was
mm,
taking any line. We were building lines on the blackboard, random lines, and he was starting play around the cycle at the lie speed without any
yeah,
single mistake. But this is what he was doing all the times, and he developed his own strategies to do it. I remember he explained he goes by subdividing the octave into smaller intervals. So he first transposes it to the triton,
right,
and
okay.
then he goes by major thirds,
Yeah.
and then minor
Oh, I see. So
thirds.
he's sort of splitting the octave in half
Yeah,
and then thirds, and yeah,
and
yeah.
then
That's not the most obvious way to do it, but I guess it ticks all the boxes
and
eventually.
he was so quick. Rowan was so quick that, oh
Mm,
my God, it was like unbelievable, unbelievable. But I never went into it first because I'm lazy,
yeah.
and after a while that I'm doing, I found it boring. But I think at the back of my brain there is, uh, I don't believe that that strategy suits me very well. So I prefer to expand some uh, a bit more the awareness of a particular sound, and then try to use it um, after I process it in a little bit more creative way. So reacting, for example, to something that you would play in the moment,
Mm,
and I can relate what you do to a particular line that sits in a file somewhere in the brain, and I just grab it and use it in context. Uh, and yeah, that's it
mm.
fundamentally.
It's funny because I'm always telling students, especially like the ideal is you get completely fluent in 12 keys, and that would be great. But actually, in reality, nobody is. But maybe there is the odd person like Michael Brecker that
Uh,
really is at least
or
close to it.
or Chris
Just
Potter.
just as good in B as or
Yeah.
Chris Potter, yeah, just as good in B major as B flat, and
Did you see that?
I guess eventually you stop. It stops being relevant.
Yeah,
If you're thinking in the right way, it just doesn't matter what key you're in anymore.
yeah. Did you see that transcription of Chris Potter playing All the Things You Are,
Yeah, yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
which is like 12 minutes, and at a certain point he doubles the time and goes up a semitone, and
Mm,
nothing changes, nothing in his
mm,
playing. He's fluent as before.
yeah.
And upper semitone is quite challenging for a tenor player because it becomes five sharps and all sort of keys that are not super comfortable just because you don't play them most of the time, right?
Mm,
And
mm,
nothing changes in him. But again, there's not magic in that. And he admits that he's a practiceaholic. He said, if I don't practice 7 hours a day, my body feels sick.
yeah. Yeah. That'll
Imagine
do it.
that. Yeah. So,
But there's a couple of things on that, which is, I mean, maybe this is looking at it in a certain way because I'm lazy as well, and I don't want to sit for 7 hours playing everything in 12 keys. But in a way, I don't want to play the same in every key.
Yeah.
I want to feel comfortable in every key, but I don't want everything I do to just translate perfectly to every key. Because, like we said earlier, those limitations can be quite useful in the right place. And also they sound different. There's a reason that Bill Evans plays lots of things in A and E, and Coltrane. The early Coltrane stuff, Mr. Day and Equinox and My Favorite Things. They're all in sharp keys.
Yeah.
And if you shift it a semitone, all the magic's gone.
Yeah.
It's like fine, it all works, but there's something about those keys. So I think it's, like I said, you want to get comfortable in all 12 keys, but also I kind of don't want to treat them as all the same thing. They do have very particular sounds that are, one semitone difference can make all the difference in the world, really, to the overall sound of the music as a whole.
Absolutely. One question I would like to ask you is, watching your transcriptions, you do a great work on the left hand of piano players. So how do you do that? What is your strategy with that particular thing? Because to me, it's still very difficult. I wouldn't be too comfortable in doing a whole transcription both hands. I'm pretty sure I will miss a few things in the left hand. So I'm very jealous first, but also interested in knowing how you do it.
Well, I think first of all, that is the most difficult thing to me still. It's the left hand, and it certainly was when I was starting out. I got to a point where I could get a reasonable transcription of the right hand, and I still really couldn't get close in the left hand, so it's taken me a very long time. And sometimes if the transcription is really, someone's playing right hand single note lines and left hand voicings, and they're very separate things, sometimes I actually transcribe them separately. I'll just do all the right hand, or a chorus of right hand, and then go back and do the left hand underneath it, just to sort of get in the zone of what that hand is doing. I think a huge amount of it is knowing the player, first of all. So I've transcribed a lot of Bill Evans, partly because I really like Bill Evans and he's very transcribable and all the stuff we talked about. But I know what he's going to do with his left hand. I've transcribed so much that I can hear a certain voicing and I know, okay, it's third, seventh, ninth or something, and I know where he's going to go. So as soon as I start transcribing someone I don't know as well, it does become a lot more difficult. I think in that particular thing, I think in left-hand voicings, it really comes down to I'm hearing the sound of the voicing as a whole much more. So I might not hear 4 individual notes, but I can hear, it's like, okay, there's a 13th in there. The 7th and the 3rd are probably there because they're almost always there. So I won't assume that they're there, but I'll check that they're there and sort of half believe that they're there already, and just check that. And then maybe I can hear a flat 9 after a few listens. And, it's much more about the sort of experience of hearing those voicings and those intervals on chords, those extensions rather on chords, than it is about hearing the lowest note and then hearing the next note up, and those are the sort of things that I do have to check much more. And what I do is I go through each transcription, play it through on the piano, and then I've got like a million pieces of paper kicking around that have bar numbers written on, which are the bars to check. And all the time I'm writing LH, left hand, just all the time, that's always the stuff to check. But I think it's, a lot of it is knowing the player and also just experience of knowing voicings. If I hear a 4th voicing, I'll know, okay, instantly that's a load of stacked up perfect 4ths, and then you've got a way in, it's not just a list of random notes anymore. It's you're expecting certain things. And practice, obviously, like all these things, it's a lot of practice. But yeah, I definitely treat left-hand voicings in a slightly different way to how I treat other things.
Yeah.
You know, and basically spend a lot more time on them.
Do you immediately write it down, or you wait? I don't know. When do you write it down, if you write it down?
I write it down as I work it out. Yeah, which
Okay.
which I'm not sure is the best thing to do. I mean, in the past I remember I had to go back home where I grew up for some reason a few years ago, and I didn't really have anything there. I just had like this MIDI keyboard and just no anything to do with it. So I thought, well, I'll just transcribe some solos and just learn them off by heart. And it's a very, very different way of doing it, and I think possibly a better way, actually, in the long run. You know, but it's not what I do. So yeah, no. What I actually do in reality is I write it down as soon as I work it out, and you know, go back and correct things and tidy things up. But it's going on the page immediately. Yeah, it's not in my. I'm not getting anything off by heart at all.
Yeah, to me, the real issue is time. You know, ideally, I would learn and memorize, as I said, you know, memorize everything by singing. But sometimes, you know, time, family, work, and everything else, you know, I just have the time to write it down as I do it, and then that's it. But we have to accept it.
Yeah, and it's not that doesn't, you know, invalidate it at all. It's
No,
just
no, no,
in an
no.
ideal
Of course.
world, you would probably want to internalize it all and things, and yeah, but reality gets in the way.
Yeah, sure. And now we already talked about this, but probably we can, if you want, expand a little bit more. Do you practice your transcriptions? And if yes, do you have a process, or you just leave it?
Yeah, I don't really practice them. I don't actually play them all that much.
Yeah.
I play them through and check them, and often I might not play it again for another 6 months, you know, which again, I'm not really telling anyone to do that at all. But I at least at this point now, what I get out of them, I try and sort of learn in the moment. And if there are particularly interesting things, sometimes I'll take things out. There was this thing that McCoy Tyner did on Star Eyes, where he used a certain voicing, fourth voicing, from the seventh of the dominant chord, and I just never heard anyone do that before. And it didn't make sense to me theoretically. I didn't understand why that sounded good, but it sounded really good, you know. And I took that out and sort of took that idea and practiced that. But I definitely don't. I couldn't play all the transcriptions perfectly, you know, or probably any of them perfectly. You know, I'd have to sit down with them for a long time, and I just don't do that. I just, again, I spend too much time on other things, really.
Yeah. So even the next question, I think we have already elaborated a little bit, and it is, how do you incorporate ideas into your playing? And you said that, you know, you are not deconstructing and then practice methodologically and religiously, you know, each line in 12 keys. But do you want to add something to it? So I'm pretty sure that, as we said at the beginning, that it's impossible for us to rest neutral to it. As you know, if I listen to the radio, or you know, the songs that my kids love to listen on the radio, I get something, and eventually could come out, you know, maybe in a different form, as a different entity, but there will be a trace of everything. This is what I believe, but I'm interested in understanding your point of view.
Well, I agree with that, definitely. I think in short, I think the things that I take out of the solos and everything that I transcribe, it's things that I don't need to go back and look at the solo to understand. So for example, actually this wasn't one of mine. I think I was just watching someone else's video of Brad Mehldau, but I noticed that he was deliberately phrasing things against the form. So when an A section starts and it's 8 bars, he wasn't playing 8 bars through that, or even 4 and 4. He was playing sort of across the form, starting a phrase on the last bar of the form, or just starting and ending in places that are sort of in conflict to that. So that's just an idea. You don't really need to go back at the transcription and look at how all those things happen. It's just like, oh, okay, maybe that's something that's worth looking into.
So you look basically at the macros.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. At the general idea that could be, you could sum up that idea in a sentence.
Yeah,
but I'll take that out.
Use majority of third intervals, or whatever tool you want to use. That's good. That's great. It's very interesting.
There was one. Actually, it was Sonny Rollins solo on "If Ever I Would Leave You" with Jim Hall and can't remember who else actually, but it's a great recording, and I transcribed that a few years ago, and basically what I worked out what he was doing rhythmically. He never plays a bar of 8 quavers, and it's a sort of reductive. To me, it seemed like a reductive approach. Like you take an 8 quaver line and take a couple of notes out. And suddenly it's much more interesting rhythmically, and it's much more broken up and less predictable, and that I found I really got obsessed with that for a long time, of practicing things in that way and trying to avoid 8 quavers at least until a couple of choruses into the solo. It's all that sort of stuff, or even just the way that one phrase follows the next. Why do those 2 phrases work together? Is it because they're complementing each other by being similar or by being different, or is one an extension of the other, or is one playing the same thing but anticipating it slightly, or why do those things work? And it's all, like you said, it's all the macro stuff, really, all the bigger ideas.
I mean, you mentioned one of the best architect in jazz. Sonny Rollins is always analyzable to the point where you get to the core of the solo, and sometimes one solo from Sonny Rollins is one idea, one single idea, or sometimes one interval, like one small concept, and he's able to build without make you noticing, unless you study it and analyze it. But examples are like, what is this thing called Love, with the Max Roach and Clifford Brown, and the melody, it's a descending minor third, and his whole solo is built on a descending minor third, but you don't notice until you transcribe it. And that's his greatness. Or the famous St. Thomas, which starts do 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 do, and those 2 notes, G and C, are the first 2 notes of the melody, just inverted, ta da ta do, right? So Sonny is fantastic on those, taking a very even silly idea and make the most luxurious building.
Yeah, exactly. There's that one on Without a Song.
Yep.
Where he just keeps playing the root. It's in E flat, and every phrase just keeps ending on E flat. And then when he gets to the B section, it really takes off, and it's given himself somewhere to go. And I love that. that the methodology there is so clear. You know, it's not some complicated chord substitution where he's
No,
accenting something else. It's
but at the
you
same
can like describe it in a sentence. You know.
but at the same time, if you try to do it, it's so difficult
Yeah,
because
yeah.
you
I
have
discovered that.
you have to have such a control on the instrument and on your phrasing, on your, harmonic devices that you use. And he's always in control, and his time is always moving, from staying ahead of the beat and then all of a sudden behind and then above the beat. It's so frustrating to listen to how well he's able to develop one small simple concept like
Yeah.
like an interval. There is also the other recording called Sony on Impulse,
Oh yeah.
and he does something similar to what you described before, but he plays a line and then cuts off the resolution. So it's like someone like saying something, a sentence, without getting to the and you
Yeah.
always are left with. And he plays like that. And I tried to to play. Oh, let's play a song, and and it's so difficult. Again, it's so difficult because you have to force yourself to be in a place where you are not comfortable, right? To do something wrong,
Yeah.
the things that we are not teaching, right?
Yeah.
No, you have to
Yeah.
resolve. You have to create the tension and then release the tension. While he's creating the tension, and then that's it.
I've tried exactly the same thing. That same. I remember thinking that's a really interesting idea. Just leave things hanging. Just
Yeah.
play a line and just take your hand off the piano halfway through. I don't know why that's so hard to do, but it's really it's like swimming against the tide.
Maybe because we practice for hours, getting a good resolution. And for
I
years
guess that's it.
we practice that. And also the music that we listen, 99% of the music that we listen is built around that concept.
Yeah.
Any tension that you create need to be resolved in a
Mm.
way. So when you go against it, it's really woo, bit like Lenny Tristano or Lee Konitz were Mash, that they were trying to end the phrase where you don't supposed to end the phrase,
Mm.
and that creates like a broken mirror. When you still see the picture, but it's all
But it also gives you somewhere to go, doesn't it?
absolutely. And
You're building tension, and again, in a really sort of macro sense, it's you've left so much on the table then that you can come back and repeat things, and you haven't just given away everything straight away.
I
I
think
think
most
that's that sort of idea of which I've probably taken from Sonny Rollins more than anyone else, actually. Again, in an overall way of thinking about constructing a solo is, I like to think that at any point you could stop. You could just stop halfway through a bar on bar 7 of the third chorus, and someone could say, what are you doing? What's the idea right now? What are you in the process of doing? And I feel like there should be a good answer to that. It shouldn't just be, I'm just playing through the changes.
yeah.
There should be some sort of in like one bullet point. There should be, I'm working with the interval of a third, or playing lots of short phrases, or whatever it is. There's a million things. It could be rhythmically or
That's right.
harmonically, or even on the instrument, or but there should be something. There should be something that you can answer that question with.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I know I've talked to people about that, and I know people disagree with that. That it can be just happening, and you just play and let things go where they want to go. But I like that sort of very organized,
Yeah.
very structured, very kind of conscious way of playing. You're not
And
just your fingers go.
and I like that. Once again, we haven't talked at all about notes,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
notes are very marginal, in understanding this music.
Mm.
And sometimes it's very sad to see that a lot of people spend a lot of time, trying to get. We can see also on YouTube sometimes there are people putting numbers above each note, like if I can like decipher a code that give me a password, to a better playing.
Mm.
I don't get it. I don't get it, because I might understand that there is the sharp 9 on a dominant chord, but if I don't know how it sounds in that specific moment, I don't care. I don't get it. And then I'm stuck because I don't know what to do with that information, because it's just a piece of information which is very sterile. I can write, a Sonny Rollins solo as numbers here, but then what do I do?
Yeah.
What
Yeah, exactly.
It's really useless. So this is when, for me, theory, and I was a very theoretical person in the past, 200 years ago, but thanks God, I got to the point where I said theory is a consequence of a sonic issue. So
Yeah.
we have created rules and theory of music to define sound, which is otherwise, untouchable. Is you can't say this is a square. Who knows?
Mm.
So we define a set of rules to understand and also to share a language, to share knowledge. But then when we play, we need to deal with sound, and that's it. To me, this
Yeah.
is my.
Well, also there's so much of theory that doesn't actually really work. It's really
That's
it's
true.
not a perfect
It
system.
works.
There are big holes in it.
It works to sell books, though.
Yeah.
For a lot
Yeah.
of people, titling, learn this set of scales and you will sound like a pro. What?
Mm. Mm.
How does that work? Let me try. No.
Yeah.
Anyway, that is great. And now, just to finish and relax a little bit the tension, so we have the resolution here of the episode.
We are resolving. Sorry.
Yeah, I have two
Didn't want to play with the form.
two silly questions, and please don't be upset with me. But I have to ask it because it started, as I said, like a game, and I love to keep doing it. The first silly question is, who was the most difficult player you transcribed?
That's a good one. There's probably a couple of answers to that. If I had to say one, probably Ahmad Jamal in certain places, at least. He has incredible technique, like ridiculous technique that he doesn't really use very often. He has this way of, he can get his left hand so quiet compared to his right hand, and it sounds like two different instruments. I'm sure maybe the way it's mic'd up helps, but he can do all that, and he does things like on the Pershing recordings. He does things where he sort of drifts out of time with the rhythm section and then comes back in again. And like, how do you write that down? Without just writing a full sentence, drift out of time. So rhythmically, I found him very, very difficult. Just as an aside to that, Herbie Hancock I find very odd in a lot of places, that he'll play things and it doesn't seem to, like, I can't work out how he played that physically in terms of fingering and things. It doesn't seem to add up. Most people play lines that fit really nicely on the piano, and Herbie Hancock, you have to actually write on the fingerings sometimes and work out, okay, if you if you do this that kind of feels wrong, it will get you to the position where you can play this, and it's very, very odd. I haven't found that with a lot of other people.
Interesting.
Andrew Hill as well, like I said earlier, is just because he's all over the place rhythmically. But yeah, I tend to stick to people that don't, those problems don't come up as much.
The thing that you said about Marjamal, incredible technique, barely used. Do you know that urban legend, saying that once Count Basie was walking into a building where several recording studios were placed, and he walks up the stairs and start hearing some incredible stride piano going on. So he started chasing the sound. He says, wow, who's that player, playing so well? And finally get to the room, opens the door, and there is Thelonious Monk sitting at the piano, stopping. And they look each other, and Monk said, don't tell anyone. And Count Basie says, I won. So I believe it's a legend, never happened, but it can demonstrate a lot.
Yeah, I could believe it. I could believe it to some extent. I'm sure he wasn't just playing the only way he knew how to play.
Yeah, of course.
And he's so idiomatically Monk. He's so himself. I don't know. Like, I often think I would love to hear how people played before they were really known. How was Monk playing when he was like 18, or how was McCoy Tyner? Because he seemed to come out like fully formed when he was like 16 or something. He had this whole sound and the whole system worked out. And I'd love to hear what he sounded like a few years before.
Yeah,
he must have got there via something.
That's a good point. And all right, are you ready for the last one?
Go on.
Which transcription you've done is your favorite, if you have to save one?
That's an interesting one.
I know it's like, those questions, who's your favorite player? And I hate those questions, but sorry, I have to do it.
I think probably the one that immediately comes to mind is I Love Music, Ahmad Jamal, because it's possibly the most difficult thing I've transcribed. It's because it's just chaos, for like 7 minutes, and it's just all over the place. And I kind of put it off for so long. I kind of wanted to transcribe it, and it's very popular. People ask about that a lot, and eventually, one weekend I just did nothing else, just like completely immersed myself in it. So probably that. Although I think probably all of the Bill Evans stuff is really what I'm best at, because I've transcribed him more than anyone else. So as a resource, that's probably about the most useful, and the most. Then nothing's ever 100%, but I think they're as close as I can get.
All right, and that's the end of this very, very informative session. Today we had the pleasure of talking to Rowan Hudson, great pianist, composer, and transcriber. I would say that's a new figure in music, transcriber. And he's heading off to Canada soon, so we wish you all the best of luck to Canada, and get in contact with the people that also have been guests on this podcast, and I'm pretty sure you will enjoy Toronto. It's a lovely city, and I thank you so much for your generosity and availability. I'm pretty sure our listeners will appreciate a lot your insight and your knowledge on the art of transcription. So thanks a lot, and Goodbye.
No problem. Thanks for having me. See you.